Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our session. Thank you for coming and watching from wherever you are. We are very happy to host tonight's session together with the IG Wien. Understanding the climate crisis as a social challenge is one of our main topics as Chamber of Labour. Much is said about reaching the climate goals and the technical needs to achieve them. But unless we help those who are unable to take a massive financial burden, and until we understand that talking about the climate crisis is talking about our common future, we won't succeed and won't reach the climate goals. That is why last year we did in Alpbach, we want to discuss the social dimension of climate change. Today, our topic is shaping climate policy toward climate justice. As we only have 1 hour to discuss this important topic, I will stop now and give the floor immediately to Nora Laufer and the other participants. Thank you for watching, and we wish you all a very fruitful discussion.
Thank you very much. Well, good evening, everybody at home and also here. Thank you for joining us. My name is Nora Laufer. I'm an economic journalist at the Austrian daily newspaper DerStandard, and I'm very happy to have 2 wonderful guests here today with me. To my right is Michaela Krömer. She's an attorney in law with a focus on, but not only, climate cases. To my left, Michael Soder. He's an economist and climate and energy expert at the Chamber of Labour. So climate change has been a huge topic throughout the past years, but recently, especially this year, since spring, it's gone a bit out of the discussion due to the COVID crisis. But nonetheless, it's still the biggest threat we're currently facing. So thank you that we can discuss it here today. But however, to solve the climate crisis, the burden must not only fall on those who are already economically or socially less privileged. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So first of all, we'll hear 2 inputs, about 15 minutes each, and then we'll start a discussion. There are some people here that you probably won't see at home, but they can ask questions, but you can also post them, and we'll try to answer as many as possible. Well, for now, Michael, I would ask you.
Thank you very much for having me here today to talk about the most important topic of the 21st century, the climate crisis and the questions of justice and distribution. Let us start with one initial thought. We are confronted with the climate crisis, with changes in complex systems that influence each other. In the most public debates, in the most discussions, we only discuss one system or the problems, the challenges arising in one system, and not a holistic approach to the different systems embedded in each other. So the economic system is, in a holistic understanding, embedded in society, and the society is embedded in the natural system, in the environment. The main focus of the most public debates is, on the one hand, the ecological dimension. That is very well researched. We know very well about the challenges we're facing with climate changes. We know about the instruments we have for environmental protection, and we have partly a debate about climate change deniers, these creepy people. They deny that the climate crisis is existing. On the economic dimension, we have in the debates a very narrow focus. On the one hand side, on the cost dimension, what are the costs of inaction or what are the costs of action? And a huge debate about growth, is it necessary or not? But what is missing on the economic dimension is the question about how we shape the structural change towards a sustainable economic system. What is also missing is the question about the role of social innovation, social change, the role of norms, institutional and social dynamics. And also what is missing is the debates around distributional issues of climate change policies or of the climate crisis itself, and additionally the question of justice. I've here on the slides a short citation of Alpbach. He argues that why is this the case that we're only talking about the ecological, economic approaches to the climate crisis in terms of a very technical approach. He argues that it may be the case that the problem analysis of the climate crisis is deeply rooted in a natural scientific perspective, and that leads to the conclusion. Okay, if we have a technical problem about the ecosystems and our way we produce and work, we have a technical solution to this problem, to these problems. And my point in this talk will be that is a huge misunderstanding because purely technological solutions cannot bring our systems at that point that we can reach the climate goals. Instead, we have to understand the climate crisis as social and societal challenge, which requires the involvement of and active participation of people. If we talk about the active participation, the involvement of people, we have also talked about take into account their sensitivities, the internal conflicts, the motivations, the social relationships and norms. Why? Because they influence how we live, dwell, travel, work, produce, consume. Additionally to this more psychological and social, more psychological elements, we have other social factors that influence how we can propose or pursue instruments and measures to actively address the climate crisis. Such social factors are the income and property situation, gender roles, age, health status, and education, and the level of education. If we talk seriously to act against the climate crisis, we have to acknowledge that all those social aspects have a determining influence of the resilience of people confronted with the consequences of rapid change. This rapid change could be, on the one hand, the climate crisis, but also could be the issue of digitalization. The inclusion of this social aspect is hence decisive in determining which strategies and measures are preferred and accepted by society, and which possibilities and opportunities individuals have to react, to deal with, to cope with the climate crisis, and how they are affected by climate policy measures. Mostly the discussions about the social dimension, is it in the public debate or in the academia, is still in its early stages. The systematic analysis of the interrelationships between environmental concerns, environmental conditions, issues of inequality and social participation is largely missing in the debates. And if it is talked about the social aspects, they are still usually talked about in the case of the adoption to the consequences of climate change. Think about urbanization trends, heat islands, and so on. For this reason, I argue in this talk that energy and climate policies have to address the social issues as soon as we try to pursue very ambitious climate goals that are necessary to reach the Paris climate goals. Additionally, if we plan the measures, conceptual measures to act against the climate crisis against the background of the social dimension of the climate crisis, we have also taken into account the dimension of time. The time is a crucial part to act against the climate crisis, and we have to take the social phenomena into account. They lead us to a situation where we have over the time to adapt our measures and strategies to cope with the climate crisis. Such phenomena could be or are population development, inequality, the potential for political participation, urbanization trends, and migration, which all of them modify our strategies from an economic policy point of view. What does we learn from this? On the one hand, we have questions of distribution. Those questions must not be dismissed with ecological motives. So, okay, we have to save the environment. We take care of distributional aspects later. On the other hand, we must not be climate protection must not be denied with reference to distributional problems. So we have, if we want to be successful in acting against the climate crisis, we have to think both elements together. Yeah? If we do not think in planning, conceptualizing, and implementing measures against these two elements together, the rising inequality and an unfairly perceived distribution of burdens makes the agreement for climate protection fade. And therefore, I argue that if we want to advocate very ambitious climate and energy policies, we should attach great importance to the question of burden sharing and social dimension. So that was more or less theoretical. So let us think about some practical examples. So if you think about distribution and inequality approaches in the climate policy, we have different transmission channels which influence the outcomes of these measures. There are the easy way, the direct measures, direct effects, direct distributional effects are most evident. You can you see the cost on your bills. You see the households that are suffering on rising prices, for instance. And this is the case where substitution is limited. Yeah? You cannot shift your heating system very easily to other forms of renewable energies and so on. All elements or all spheres in daily life where you have no possibilities, alternatives to switch away from fossil-based resources, that there you see the direct effects. More interesting or more tricky is the part if the effects are indirect. Yeah? Think about the example energy efficient building. So maybe you have a trade-off. If the construction of energy efficient building is expensive, more expensive, you have a trade-off with the rental or housing costs. Yeah? We have also a problem on the housing markets. Think about the discussions about social housing. You should be able to get both social housing and energy efficient buildings. Other example is declining sectors, declining production in fossil-based sectors, which goes hand in hand with jobs or income losses. Therefore, we have to propose solutions to secure jobs and income, to shift it to other sectors, and to create perspectives for those who suffer from these rapid changes. Let me bring even a little bit more practical example. We have the discussions about the decarbonization, about the heating sector in Austria, in Europe. So you should switch from fossil fuel-based heating systems to renewable heating systems. You see here on your right-hand side of the table the income distribution and the heating, the way you heat, and we see that coal heating systems are over proportionally existing in lower income households. So the measure, the proposed measure in policy-wise is often that you give monetary incentives. You get 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 euros to switch to a renewable heating system. Yeah, but if you are located in the lowest income sector, in the lowest 10%, yeah, for instance, you cannot afford to switch to renewable energies in heating when the switch to those new heating systems costs 15 up to 20,000 euros. Yeah. Also, when you get the monetary incentive of 5,000 euros. So you have the change that we have to bring down on Earth in the next 10 years must be socially acceptable so that everyone can participate in the change and no one is left behind. You know, we have to tackle, the goal have to be that we have to tackle environmental and social questions simultaneously. One more example is the debate surrounding just and fair transition. That's a normative concept of a just and fair transformation of the economic system away from the exploitation of nature and the fossil fuels towards a sustainable way of living. Yeah, here you see a strong link between environmental justice and social justice. Different actors in the debates of a just transition have a little different foci, but we can identify some key points of such a just transition. The one key point is they think different policy fields together to propose solutions that are environmental friendly and socially balanced. Labor market policy combined with environmental policies, industrial policies with innovation policies, and social policies in different shades and different combination. And another key point is the co-determination, political participation. Just transition concepts try to foster political participation on the different political levels, reaching from the workplace up to the national state or the international political level. They also mostly include emancipation strategies resulting from the link between poverty and environmental change. Think about energy poverty and all these topics. And they have a strong focus on development of local and regional strategies in the design of the decarbonization process based on a democratic process. Examples can be found in the literature in so-called transition centers, transition towns in coal regions, for instance, in the USA, Canada, and Germany. Interesting would be also such just transition concepts, maybe for other fossil fuel-based sectors like the automotive sector. And we find also the idea of just transition concept and different Green New Deal concepts, like the just transition proposed in the Green Deal, the European Commission, or the just transition, the strong stance of just transition in the proposal of Pettifor and Jackson in the UK Green New Deal, and also finally in the Green Deal from the USA, from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So, what we can conclude? We can conclude that the climate crisis is not a pure technical question. It is not a pure economic question. It is in the core a social and societal challenge, which has to be addressed in the next 10 years. We need, in planning, conceptualizing, and implementing climate change, climate policies, we need to tackle the social and cultural dimension really seriously. Inequality plays a central role in the context of who suffers from the consequences of climate change, who bears the costs for the measures against climate change, and who suffers from environmental damage. This makes the climate crisis in the core a central question of justice. And I think we all are in these questions maybe on the same page. If we want an ambitious climate and energy policy, we have to start to think the different dimensions in planning, conceptualizing, implementing measures together. We have to consider them together. We have to propose solutions. They address not one dimension. They have to address two or more dimensions of climate change. Otherwise, there is the political danger that we are failing, and that we are failing in climate politics and energy politics. That is really what we cannot afford. Thank you very much.
Back to you, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Justice is a powerful idea, and law is a tool that can help realize it. That's something I believe as an attorney, and that's why I'd like to talk a little bit as contribution to our discussion about law, the laws we already have, as a tool to bring about the change that Michael has talked about. I'm fully aware that this is a huge topic and that I only have about 5 to 10 minutes. Climate injustice consists of many layers and many stories, and law is a tool that works quite concretely to a situation in a country, in a specific context. So please bear with me. I can only talk about one piece of the puzzle, and my wish is that this piece of the puzzle helps for everyone outside of the court system to understand a bit about of the movement that is going on in the courts, where we are trying to support the movement that's going on in the streets. So my story is about one of my clients. He's one of my favorite clients. He is a very smart, super polite young guy, and he joined the Austrian climate case, which was filed in February. Sadly, this guy suffers from multiple sclerosis. To those of you who don't know, this is a neurological illness. It plays out quite differently from person to person. In his case, it already comes with signs of paralysis. What I didn't know, and that I found intriguing and shocking at the same time, is that he also suffers from something called the Uthoff syndrome. That's a phenomena that about 70 to 80% of MS patients are affected by. And it means that the symptoms of the illness worsen with temperature rise. Put differently, in his case, if it's over 28 degrees or more, this guy is bound to his wheelchair. There is no cure for heat-induced, so it comes with heat, it gets worse with heat, and it leaves with cold. That's obviously an interesting case for a lawyer when it comes to the climate crisis and climate justice. And one thing that I think you can note in his case, and it happens in other cases, is that victims of the climate crisis, those that already suffer, can take on a leadership role in climate change litigation for the mere fact that their case is more cruel, it's more obvious, and hence more convincing to the courts. So I'm glad he joined, because he's intrigued by the same question that I am, which is, do we as Austrians, and I apologize to everyone watching from abroad, but this is what I'm concerned about, do we have a right in the face of the climate crisis? What about our constitution, which is quite similar to many constitutions worldwide, in that it has the right to life and the right to private and family life, where you derive a right to health. I'm going to talk about that a bit in a minute. So you have these rights at the core, and then the question is, what are they worth if they can't hold in the face of the climate crisis? So they have to have a value. At least that's what I think, and that's what I'm testing. So let me detour a little bit on the European Convention of Human Rights, because it's been a main tool in climate litigation. You have these rights, and these rights include a duty, an obligation of states to effectively protect them. It's not a choice, it's an obligation. When does this arises, sorry. If you talk about the right to life, the state has to protect it whenever there is a foreseeable real threat to this right. That means foreseeable, that it's unavoidable that this is going to happen unless there is action by the state. The right to family and private life protects your personal zone. It protects your personal dignity, your personal well-being, your health. So whenever there is a severe impact, there has to be a level of severity. But if there is a severe impact on that life, the state has to act. The state has to act and do whatever it's within its reasonable powers to do so. There are, with the right to health, that I call it for communication's sake, a certain margin of appreciation, because the state can obviously balance it out with regards to other rights and actions that he does for the public good. But the more severe the impact, the stronger the duty. So far, so good. What are the bullet points to take away? The European Court of Justice hasn't decided on the role of these rights with regards to the climate crisis. There is, however, a lot of case law with regards to environmental hazards. And the case that has been made that these environmental hazards are also out of the state's control, they are unpredictable, they do also affect a greater group of people. So these cases should apply to the climate crisis. It's just sort of continuing the thinking that has already been done. The Supreme Court in the Netherlands, I think a lot of you might know, has actually ruled on the basis of these two rights that I just spoke about, Article 2, Article 8 ECHR, that the Dutch government has a duty to reduce carbon emissions. So what's interesting in the context also of climate justice is these rights are individual. So there might be some individuals who suffer more, who will enjoy a greater protection under the system. They are human and individual rights, which makes it also a challenge, but which also makes it an opportunity. We'll see what the European Court of Human Rights is going to do. It will soon be approached with cases. And yeah, I think I leave that for now. And I continue to the story of my client. So we have these rights. And then always the question is, what's the road available to claim these rights? And that's another interesting hurdle that is quite peculiar in Austria, because there is no way to challenge the government's inaction on the basis of these duties that I just spoke about. The biggest problem in Austria, and I would dare to speak for many other countries, is not that our governments are so busy doing so many things and messing up on the way. The fact is that too little is happening. There's a lot of inaction, there's a lot of ignorance. So how do you tackle that legally? And that is the challenge. And in Austria, we decided to take a procedural detour. If you can't challenge inaction, you're looking for really bad action that you can challenge. There is still, it's a very tight framework, and I'm not going to bore you with that for now, but that's why we ended up challenging tax credits that are given to the aviation sector. We're asking the Constitutional Court, my client is also asking the Constitutional Court to repeal these norms. And that brings me to the remedies. So you have rights, you have a road, and you have a remedy. In his case, the remedy would be that these norms would be invalidated. That is interesting and could potentially be a powerful tool if you once get a decision that these rights apply, because you can directly attack really bad norms, socially really bad norms, potentially. I'm not sure if this is going to happen, to be very honest, but that's the idea behind making all the effort. When it comes to remedies, I'd like to put that puzzle piece of my client a little bit into the international context, because there are many climate crisis cases worldwide. The front runners are actually a lot of countries who are most severely affected and have done the least to be in the situation they find themselves in. Now, let's take, for example, a case I'm really making this up to give you an example of what I'm thinking of a farmer in Bangladesh whose house has been flooded. He might get compensation money by the Bangladeshi court. Let's assume he gets the money. This money is paid by Bangladeshi taxpayers. And then I think the question to that is, why should Bangladeshi taxpayers, why should Bangladesh, as clearly one of the countries who've done very little to contribute to the mess that we are in, pay for a lot of these damages and adaptation money that is needed when it has done very little to actually be in the situation it finds itself in? And I think that's one of the reasons why scholars are proposing that this could be one interesting way for the international community and industrial nation to step up with their obligation and also to contribute in this way by just, financially supporting these compensation monies that has to be paid. Because these cases will increase and do increase as the situation gets more dire. And legally speaking, the case will be much easier to make. Science improves and the situation is just awful and it's going to get worse. I like to close my little story by a picture that I like to use when I talk to my young cousins and trying to explain what I'm actually doing and how all of this works. And I tell them that it's a little bit like a good yoga teacher. If you're a good yoga teacher, you're not asking your students to take really weird positions that you've never been into and that's going to hurt. But what you're asking them to do, and this is what attorneys are asking the courts to do, is to put new breath into the positions they've already taken, to stretch a bit further while focusing on what's right in front of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those insights. For all of you who are joining us from home or somewhere else in the world, you can now post the questions online. I'm sorry, I'll be looking at my phone from time to time just to check if there are any new questions. But right now, I'd like to start with a question here. So the Austrian Parliament has declared a climate emergency last year, like so many other countries, states, and cities. Which is rather a symbolic act. And you said the state needs to act. In Austria, greenhouse gas emissions are on the rise. So is that enough? Is declaring a climate emergency? I'll start with you.
Clearly not. So we have, as you said, this is a symbolic act. It's an important act on this political symbol. But you have to fill it up with measures, with concept, with plans. So that was one of my points in the presentation, that we have to think about and democratically discuss about how we tackle the effects of the climate, the consequences of the climate crisis, and take care of that no one is left behind. And that, I think, should be more discussed in the political process. And hopefully it will lead into measures that function in that way.
I mean, you've already touched the constitution, and there have been talks in Austria to also enter the protection of the climate into the constitution. Would that make sense? Would that put more force or effort in the whole policy?
To your first question, the climate emergency declaration of the parliament, that's an argument that was used in my submission, saying that the state is very well aware of the danger and even more so has a duty to act. So the state cannot say, well, we weren't really sure what's going on. That's an aside. Yes, I do think a constitutional reform would be very helpful. I think there's a couple of things that would be great. One is to have an overall budget that could be spent, and to have obligations to on a road to reduction, and obviously to have possibilities to challenge if this isn't happening. Remedies are crucial when you have rights. A right is useless if you don't have a remedy. I also think it would be good to have a right to a healthy environment and the right to protection of the negative consequences of the climate crisis that would help to tackle more. Yet the big challenge in Austria is if you cannot challenge in action, this will be still rather difficult. It would be a completely new thing to say, well, let's have the Constitutional Court at least go as far as declaring that the inaction causes a breach of the duty, a breach of rights. I think that would be helpful because you want these rights to be relevant and to be usable and not just a more substantive declaration of something that you can't claim. So it's always really important to have enforcement mechanism and clarity.
One of these enforcement mechanisms in Austria could be the carbon tax that the government is planning and the one applied in 2022. So activities that are bad for the climate, bad for the environment will be more expensive. And you've touched the topic before. Probably it won't be as just anymore because those who are economically less privileged will likely have to pay more for, as you said, the heating system. So how can the transition be more just?
Okay. Can I have two remarks. One answer of your question and a remark to your comment. I think you tackled a very important element, that the value of right and the duty of the state in that context. I think the state or politics has the duty to build a framework for the transformation, how to lead and guide the transformational process into the direction of a sustainable economy. What we are seeing now, national or international, is often a privatization of regulation. Yeah. So, okay, there are some monetary incentives to do that and that, yeah? And there is the huge value of consumer sovereignty. I think that is a little bit of a wrong understanding from the duty of the democratic state in give an idea and a perspective for the transformation process. So it need the regulation, need the guidelines, and action in investments and so on. And that brings me to your question about the price on carbon. I think there will be some, or there have to be some form of taxation of carbon, but you have to keep in mind the element which I had in the presentation, that there is also a strong need for possibilities for substitution. If you don't have the possibilities to substitute your car against an electric car, your car against public transport, your heating system on a renewable basis, you will create maybe on the lower bounds of the income distribution challenges. And so you have to think the taxation of carbon not as a silver bullet, but as a small part of a big economic policy program that steers the economy and the society towards a sustainable society and economic system.
You'd like to reply on that?
Complete.
Then I'd like to ask in here if there's already a question, because you can also ask questions in here. If not, I will try to find the first one. So there's been a couple of questions. So one of them is, I'm just reading them out. Sorry for using my phone now. How threatening will arbitration courts, as often established within trade agreements, be to fighting for climate justice on a legal perspective in the future? What role do they play and why are they so problematic? I think that's toward you, Michaela.
It's a tricky question with many parts. Arbitration in general is a private proceeding, so difficult from a social aspect because the public and the affected public can't join these proceedings. I mean, you can sometimes file amicus curiae briefs that the court can or cannot consider. I've worked in arbitration prior to my work in climate crisis, so I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing when it involves contract between two companies. I'm more skeptical when it involves the state versus the company, when it involves public goods. I find that problematic, in particular due to the participation of people who might be affected by it and who are affected by it. The second question was something into how to rule on climate justice. I mean, climate justice is a concept, it's an idea, and laws are tools. So you'd have to look into which tools you can use to call on climate justice. And that's very complicated, and that depends on the laws applicable. I do think, I'm highly skeptical on investment arbitration and allowing arbitration for public goods. And I do think that comes to what Michael says, there has to be a shift in who owns what. I think very clearly the system we are having isn't working. And I just told you about the stretches. Attorneys are trying to make it work with what we have. But I don't think this is where we need to stop. And we need to really think on, we have created this system, we can change it, how do we change it? And don't take too many things for granted just because they've been that way for a long time.
There are quite a few laws in Austria that make it rather attractive to act in ways that are bad for the environment. For example, the tax shield for diesel. So what can be done here?
Yeah, again, I think loosely based measures are not the way we can proceed in this huge crisis and challenge for society. So if you think about little measures about taxation of fossil fuels or taxation of aviation and so on, you have to set it in a greater framework of regulation, which offers the companies, the consumers, the employees, a clear line where the society should develop, and which is the direction in which we should develop our systems further. I think the main task here is for the state, for the parliament, to get a clear framework that offers a safety for all economic actors, that this is the path and we all are going into this direction. And after we have such a framework, we can talk about thousands of different measures, and we have to evaluate each of them against the distributional effects. We have to think it together with the environmental effects. So it should be a strong steering effect in there, and possibly, in the best case, without major social and distributional problems arising with them.
So there's a next question that came in. It's about also the intergenerational conflict that we're facing. So it's not only about poor or rich, but it's also about an older generation basically living on the cost of a younger generation. And the question is about a lawsuit called Our Children's Trust in the US, which I guess and hope you know. And the question is, so how do the panelists see the lawsuit? Could it set a precedent for amplifying the voices and concerns of the younger generations? Michaela.
I know the lawsuit, but I don't like to give evaluation on the outcome of any lawsuit, not even the ones that I am fully active on. One thing I like to note with intergenerational conflict is that already in 1993, the Philippines filed a lawsuit. It was regarding the right to a healthy environment for future generation, and this case won. This case hasn't received so much public attention now because it's old, but it also shows you that actually countries who have been affected the most have already been quite active on their toes. And I think that comes to who is leading what in this game. yes, of course, it would set a precedent if more and more courts are deciding on intergenerational rights to the positive. Yet again, I mean, even in a European framework, the Austrian Constitutional Court is not bound by the decision of the Dutch Supreme Court. So you have to really look into the hierarchy of systems, which court has the last word, and that will affect the system, that will affect the continent. But of course, the international law is also something that is considered by courts, and if more and more courts are taking an active role in this, it could start a movement, but that's step by step. I hope that answered the question. If not, please send another text message, because I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a brain game. So the old generation, the new one, and so on. I think it is a little bit misleading from the question, because it misleads from the really important point that we are the first. I think our generation is the first generation that will see the consequences of climate change, and we are the last generation that can actively choose to act in time to reduce the challenge and the consequences of climate change. So it's time to act now, and not the time to discuss. Is it our parents' fault or?
I think the issue with intergenerational, right? Sorry for that. Is a bit, how much do you have to consider future generations? And if there has a right, then comes to your thinking of how much does it have to be considered in policies and frameworks. I do see that it's tricky. It is tricky, but I do think it's definitely worth exploring. And also, even if you're not successful in that lawsuit, just to bring back the idea that, yes, there are people to come, and these people also have rights.
I was talking to the climate expert Hans-Joachim Schellhuber in Alpbach, and what he proposed is that one could make like a generational contract, which also includes Corona. So his idea basically is that now the young people stay at home, they don't go out and party in order to keep the older safe. And on the other side, the older generation says, okay, we're going to help you fight the climate crisis. Is that something that sounds convincing to you?
It's a little bit of bargaining. So as an economist, I would say, put a price tag on there and it's fine. No, yeah.
I'd like to say something a bit different, which is not entirely answering your question. I'm aware of that. In this whole discussion about rights, who has which rights, I think it's also questionable, why doesn't nature have any rights? I mean, corporations do. Why not? And maybe that would also help with certain intergenerational conflicts if there's another actor in the game. Yeah, full stop.
I've seen there was one question here.
Yeah, Ms. Krömer, you said you have to work as an attorney for your cases with what's there, kind of. And so the Austrian climate petition, the Klimavolksbegehren, currently works simultaneously on something like a carbon emission court of audit, Klimarechnungshof, and as a federal law, kind of a climate law, and also on a constitutional level. And so I wanted to ask you kind of, what do you need as an attorney, or where do you think is it the best position, the legal system, to strengthen the role of the individual against polluters' interests?
I'm actually in the group of the lawyers drafting this proposal, so I'm taking good care of that I can use it in my future work. So I'm not sure how much it's already up to sharing publicly, but yes, I do think we need different players in the game and different mechanisms of control that will definitely help any lawsuits. I mean, data helps not only scientists and policymakers, it also helps lawyers. And if you have a system of control and a body that checks scientifically, factually what's going on, then you can build better cases. But it's also really important, again, to find a mechanism that if you get rights, there is remedies available to claim them. You have a control and enforcement mechanism. So I'm trying to find some good loopholes there to get going once the new law is enforced.
Maybe one remark to your question, not directly tackling it, but I think we are always talking about greenhouse gas emissions. So that's right. Yeah, it's a very important issue. But if you have a look at the so-called planetary boundaries, it's only one part of the problem. You have also the issue of land use. You have the issue of biodiversity loss. So it's clear we are talking always about CO2 emission because we are really good in measuring it. But there are many problems more coming with climate change besides the CO2 emissions. And my proposal or my proposal would be maybe economists should not play. Okay, this is against my own profession, but nevertheless, maybe economists should not play that crucial role in every part of societal challenges, and we should have an open ear for sociologists, anthropologists, and psychologists a little bit more to get the breadth of the big problem of the climate crisis.
Those are some professional suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
There was another question in the audience.
Hi, I think this question is to Michael, because I, of course, love the idea of the social dimension in climate policies. But it seems like we're already too slow in taking climate policies without this dimension, and then adding this dimension adds complexity and adds bargaining that you have to do. Do you think it's realistic that we do it this way? Could we be fast enough to kind of stop the climate crisis with this social dimension?
Good question. Yeah, maybe good answer to that. Yeah, there is no neither nor. Yeah, you have to incorporate the social dimension. If not, if you're doing this not, there will be a fade away of social compromise in bringing, political speaking, the necessary measures through the political process. Think about the Yellow Vest protests. Think about Hamburg. Think about different aspects of this discussion. So, in my point of view, there is the obligation to think it together. Yeah, it makes it more complex. Therefore, you have to strengthen the democratic processes on the local level, of the workplace level, of the national level, and so on to get done what has to be done.
Thank you. Is there another question here in the audience? Otherwise, I'd take one more from the chat. All right. So I think that might already be our last question. Maybe there's time for one more. So it's about something that you've mentioned before, the Philippines, and that often the climate crisis hits there where the emissions basically are not emitted, but somewhere else. And the question is, the Philippines is also one of the most vulnerable countries affected by climate change. How can we discontinue the loop of simply having global aid money coming in after disasters happen?
So can I rephrase the question? It is, how can we stop global aid money
coming in after disasters
to sort of not keep them victimized? Or
the question goes on, how can we demand for remedies funds that go towards mitigation and prevention?
This is a difficult question. I actually have to think about that, for the very reason that legal systems do work nationally. Internationally, it's getting more and more complicated. And I would have to think of what court you can go to. I mean, one note that some people are trying to go to the International Criminal Court. Is the idea of ecocide, is the idea of holding individuals accountable. That's some level of international criminal justice. I think a parallel you could look into is also cases that are human rights cases against big corporations that will get you an idea of how international criminal work, the lines it follows. I think that would be ideas to think about. And you can see from all the talking that, yes, it's difficult to challenge a globalized world. Our law is really very national and continental, and yet we're living in a global world, very interdependent, and that's a challenge that has to be overcome, and that also shows you that climate crisis exacerbates existing issues of poverty. I mean, this all feeds into each other, which is why I think Michael is 100% correct. There can't be any compromise. There is no either or, and you have to tackle them all together. And I'm sorry, I can't give you a concrete answer to your question.
Let's ask the economist.
Yeah, good question. I answer it may be in that way that James Bohr is a professor in Massachusetts, once wrote a very interesting paper which he argues that in the current economic system, richer people over proportionally profit from the economic activity that degenerates environment and the basis for future flourishing for human life. And the poorer part of the population suffers from the consequences over proportionally and has to bear the costs. Yeah? So if we talk about state aids, whatever, we have to put the question of inequality in the center, because what is clear is that we have a really, really huge demand for investment, not only in mitigation, but also in adaptation. So we have to finance both sides, and there the question of justice arises, who is able to pay and who suffers already.
One interesting case, I'm sorry, I hope we still have time, that comes to mind is the case against RWE, where it's a Peruvian farmer suing RWE in Germany, and the proceeding actually continues and is currently at a fact-finding mission that's on hold because of Corona. The idea is that RWE as a carbon major has a certain share and a certain responsibility. And this guy lives at a village near a glacier that's melting, and it's threatening his village, his livelihood. He claims a percentage of the protection adaptation measures, and he asks that of RWE, and that's an interesting lawsuit which also plays into the idea of international justice and going away from aid into claiming what you actually earn, put it that way. Yeah.
We're almost up with our time. Maybe a last short question to you. What would you recommend individuals if they want to sue, if they want to do something? What would you recommend them?
People who are sincere about that, I would recommend them to reach out to either attorneys in the field or a non-governmental organization, and to just talk and see what can be done.
All right. Well, then at this point, I'd like to say thank you very much, both of you. Thank you to the questions in the audience. Thank you for joining us here. Have a wonderful evening or day wherever you are. And well, here, everybody have a good evening, and thank you.